Welcome to the Using the Whole Whale podcast, where we learn from leaders about new ideas and digital strategies making a difference in the social impact world. This podcast is a proud production of Whole Whale, a B Corp digital agency. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's go learn something. This week on the nonprofit news feed for the week of August 22nd, talking about billions of dollars for a conservative NGO, which we'll dig into in just a second. Nick, how's it going?
It's going good, George. How are you?
Yeah, well, I'm doing all right. It's my daughter's first week of TK, so that's the biggest news. So, we could stop the show or continue, but it's a big week for any parent.
Oh, that's super exciting. Best of luck to her.
I'll keep the team updated.
No, we need that. But yeah, I'll take us into our first story. And this is kind of an interesting one. This was initially reported by the New York Times over the weekend, but it follows the saga of an electronics manufacturing mogul, Barry Steve, who's donated over $1.6 billion to a conservative political nonprofit named the Marble Freedom Trust. The Marble Freedom Trust is a 501c4, so it is a nonprofit. But it's led by a prominent conservative political operator that has given tons of money and is largely associated with the Federalist Society, which is in turn largely credited with engineering increasingly conservative Supreme Court. But the long story short is that this donation of $1.6 billion represents what's believed to be the largest single individual donation to a political organization of the sort in American history. And that $1.6 billion surpasses the spending of the top 15 Republican and Democratic aligned nonprofits during the 2020 election, just with this donation alone. So it seems to be that we're entering into a new chapter of political advocacy with 501c4, which are nonprofits groups, at the center of this nexus of complicated, money maneuvering and politicking. And what's your takeaway on this?
I was actually a little confused as to how much the agenda of the Federalist Society may be perpetuated or pushed on by the Marble Freedom Trust, which anytime I see freedom in the title of it, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Do you know the answer to that, of the connection there after reading through this?
Yeah, so I did a little digging and the article goes into it a little bit, but the Marble Freedom Trust appears to be relatively new, but is under the control of a guy named Leonard A. Leo, who, among other titles, was previously vice president of the Federalist Society and seemed to be the guy in charge, and is credited essentially with handpicking every conservative Supreme Court justice since Roberts. So Clarence Thomas actually joked that this guy was the third most powerful person in the world, which is kind of the quiet part said out loud. But it would seem that this guy has a ton of influence. And now with this donation, a ton of money as well for, a whole host of agenda items, it would seem.
Yeah, I'd say objectively, one of the things I take away is based on its goal, the Federal Society has been wildly successful. They had a very, very long-term vision of what they were trying to do in terms of placing Supreme Court justices that were Republican-leaning conservative values first into play. They have succeeded beyond, maybe original wildest dreams with the current election of the court. And I would say one of the things that seems clear is that that type of vision or long-term thinking is maybe what gets donors of this size to engage. And then you can sometimes look at maybe a progressive tactic, which is, what's burning right now is what we're going to pay attention to and fund right now, as opposed to what does our next 10 years look like? And that's, maybe an unfair broad brush, but it's you should consider it. You should consider it if you are in the political adjacent world of your nonprofit, but also positioning to large donors, right? Like what got this donor excited, interested to write a check of this magnitude is a long-term vision of size and being like, hey, how do we parlay this win? So I would say, obviously midterms are here, but this is beyond that is my sense of like 1.6 billion won't be spent on midterms. It's going to be spread out. So that's where my head went. And also I just pay attention when I see the dollars in the billions being sent to one organization. You're like, well, that's going to be significant.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment. And also what's interesting is it actually wasn't a cash donation. It was structured in a clever and albeit legal way in which it was essentially a stock donation. This guy sold his whole stake in a company to some Irish firm, and then that made its way. But kind of an interesting structure there. But we'll keep an eye on this one. I have a feeling we're going to see more stories like this in the next couple months as we approach the midterms. But I'll take us into our next story, and this one comes from govtech.com. And the headline is that nonprofits across the country are still struggling to find workers and consistent funding, according to a new survey. So the survey was published last month by the global accounting firm UHY, which found that 40% of charities say that employment remains the highest priority as service demands remain elevated because of inflation and the lingering pandemic. So this is a thread we've been following on this podcast for a while. Of course, there was a really significant nonprofit sector employment gap. Lots of folks laid off in the beginning of the pandemic as financial woes hurt nonprofits hard. But now on the flip side of that is that macroeconomic pressures are making it harder to hire. Employment is at a really historic low. Wages are at a historic high proportionally. These macroeconomic pressures are putting nonprofits that operate, quite frankly, on the margins of kind of financial stability in a precarious place. George, what are we thinking on this one?
I think it's an interesting number that this group is able to put on it. And the 40% of charities saying that, they have notable increase in funding, while 22% reporting a decrease, and looking at saying that 40% of charities have this employment concern as their highest priority, which, okay, like every company would say in some respect, like, what's the most important? People first. It's how we get our jobs done. But, juxtapose that with the fact that, you've got, pandemic, post-pandemic demands, social need combined with inflation now. And it's a question of pay and competitiveness. Last year, the National Council of Nonprofits, they estimated that 500,000 NGO jobs were unfilled, right? And that's a lot. A third of nonprofits have job vacancies. And jobs not being done at nonprofits means people not being served in local communities. Those are directly corollary. So it does note here some good news. It found that nonprofits are emphasizing new tech for budgeting and communications, also help bolster collaboration between organizations. So there may be an opportunity to say what can we use from the good old tech industry innovations, efficiencies to increase output.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think on the flip side is you also have people who stayed on at organizations who are now asked to be doing more with less people. Someone who was wearing 3 hats is now wearing 5 or 6 hats. And I think we've seen that as well, even in our day-to-day. So definitely something we'll continue to track here, but I think your points are totally valid.
Yeah, I mean, we do see it. We're a consulting agency that works with social impact organizations, nonprofits, and our contacts at these organizations end up leaving, and they'll go to, sometimes big name organization, big name for-profit institution, because their skills are highly sought after. And there's a certain point where the social impact and intrinsic value, the value of the work, is simply not enough for the costs necessary or the money opportunity that the for-profit sector, as they sort of increase and keep up with a tight labor market, has in play. How long that lasts is unclear, but we see it. And you're right, and with and inside our clients.
Yeah. Interesting to see this play out kind of in real life,
Yeah.
big economic questions. But I want to take us to our next article, and this comes from GOBankingRates.com, which maybe sounds sketchy, but the article is legit.
I did
It's
some
about
digging for these. You know what? Before you tune out,
We-
you think it's Go Banking because it's all caps on the Go Banking.com. It's a real article.
that
I promise.
now required. That's now in our editorial guide for this podcast. But GOBankingRates.com is reporting that medical debt, as reported by the Kaiser Family Foundation, plagues 41% of adults currently, which is staggeringly high. But it highlights the work of a New York-based nonprofit called RIP Medical Debt, which has wiped out $7.1 billion in medical debt so far, aiding almost 4 million Americans. So I'm not going to pretend to understand exactly how this works, but apparently they can buy debt for a value significantly cheaper than the worth of that debt. So for every $100 donated to this charity, they can buy debt valued at $10,000. So it seems that there's this kind of exponential ripple effect here where they can buy debt at a severe discount and help a lot of people and erase a lot of medical debt. And this charity has managed to eliminate 7.1 billion in medical debt so far. George, what's your take on this? And I'm gonna pass it to you. I'm out of my depths now.
This is pretty good. I may try to chase these folks down for a podcast because I like large systemic solutions. What I understand from this, clearly at a high level, acknowledge the number one reason an American will declare bankruptcy is healthcare related costs and unexpected or what have you costs coming from a uncovered medical expense, right? So, okay. And now we're aware of what happens once you have to declare bankruptcy, credit ruined, unable to really leverage the full financial systems of mortgages and loans and things that you may need in the future. It is a tough mark on your resume. So what this group appears to be doing is buying distressed debt at scale. And what is uniquely different here is that it's not individuals applying in saying, here is my story. It's sadder than the next one. Make a value-based judgment and give us money instead of this other person. I have this type of cancer. It is better than that. It is getting away from that and it is abstracting it to the highest level, which is bundles of essentially distressed debt, right? And so they seem to be buying bundles at 1%. So there's a group being like, look, we're sending these harassing messages, trying to gather, this money from, folks that can't pay their medical bills. They know they're going to, probably declare bankruptcy. Those probably are going to default. And so instead, it seems like this group is saying hey, do you want some money instead of no money? We'll get you out of that. In exchange, I imagine by absolving this debt at scale, they are offering sizable amounts of relief. And you look at this opportunity that they have, and it's you won't get as many, small stories because again, it's not individuals submitting to hey, I have $60,000. Can you solve this? No, we're going to solve 6 billion by looking at it in these large tranches. Juxtapose that with GoFundMe, which has, a power law of 1% of the group getting funded and the rest maybe not getting funded when you put your story of desperation publicly on GoFundMe. Most of that money, if you look on their stats, is coming from people asking for healthcare related support. And so I'm just so completely all in on this conceptual direction of how you might deal with a problem like this. I think it's transferable, looking at and taking a step back from the individual to the groups and the systems and playing with the for-profit sector, the debt structures. And that's how you can leverage higher amounts of change as shown by the fact that, every $100 they can talk about relieving 10K of debt.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's incredible. I think it'd be great to talk to them some more. So we'll see if we can follow up with them and get them on the podcast. All right, George, that's a great point, and actually takes us into our next article, which comes from healthcarefinancenews.com, in which the headline is "Nonprofit Hospitals Outlook has been downgraded to deteriorating by a ratings firm." And the article states that due to labor and other macro inflationary pressures, Fitch Ratings, the rating firm, has revised its outlook for nonprofit hospitals and health systems to deteriorating. So we talked about the closing and financial struggles of nonprofit hospitals, particularly in areas with poor health access. But it seems that these hospitals are now on rockier financial footing than ever before. And due to severe volume disruption and operations, even though that appears to be waning as we kind of leave this pandemic phase, the expenses are still elevated. Labor expenses are, it says here, permanently high and at a higher level for the rest of 22 and likely well beyond. So it seems that nonprofit hospitals are also feeling the brunt of these larger economic pressures.
Yeah, and it's seen across nursing shortages because of the costs there, not being able to, the erosion of margins due to increased inflation costs not seen since 1982. I can even just tell you, this is random aside, that even the price of CO2 has been going up, and hospitals get priority on these types of gases, right? So compressed gas takes energy, takes processing, and the prices on these things are going through the roof. I'm not taking CO2 from a hospital. I was told I was back of the line because of my home brewing setup is not priority. But looking at those prices at scale, I'm like, you're paying X and then suddenly it turns to 2, 3, 4X when you need basic supplies to run your hospital. So yikes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And even something as obscure as compressed like CO2 can have like real impacts. Like that was something I've never even thought about.
Yeah, this brought to you by random facts about me that sometimes relate to the overall systems. But again, nonprofit hospitals are serving the community in a public interest way. And so if they are struggling or deteriorating, that does not mean anything good for 2023, which they talk about this carrying into.
Absolutely. All right. How about a feel-good story to finish the podcast?
What do you got?
This one comes from eater.com for all the foodies out there. And it's about a really innovative nonprofit called Food Forward, which works to intercept food that otherwise would go up into landfills. This is often fresh produce. It intercepts that and actually brings it to places where food access is really a struggle for folks living there. So Food Forward works with 350 direct partners to coordinate food donations to 12 California counties, 6 states, and 2 tribal nations. And the tribal nation highlighted here is the Cherokee Nation, where Native American reservations are kind of notorious for really, really struggling with fresh access or access to fresh food. So this makes a world of difference there. And there's a couple other organizations and coalitions involved in this, but it says that they managed to, they reached a milestone in June of moving 250 million pounds of food, or 1 billion servings of fresh produce. So this is no small little operation here. So just wanted to shout out a really cool, innovative organization doing the fundamental but still dire work for the diet, fulfilling that dire need of helping people access fresh food.
Yeah, Food Forward. We actually had them on the podcast. Friend of the pod, a number of years back, an incredible volunteer network, but also are paying attention to the entire system and working to direct food to where it's needed, which again, we talk about a last mile problem and the fact that like there's certainly enough food just in terms of like the number. We have enough food to feed all of the people. We don't have enough logistics, transportation, efficiencies in our bureaucratic systems that deliver and move food to those in need. That's the thing in question. So articles pointing out this type of when is exciting to see. All right, Nick. Thanks for helping us get the news.
Thanks, George.
This has been Using the Whole Whale podcast. If you want to keep learning more about these topics and others, head on over to wholewhale.com/university to keep learning with us. Thanks as always to GregThomasMusic.org for his tunes that underwrite our tracks. They're fantastic. Hope you're doing well, Greg. And just a reminder, subscribes really help us on any platform that you listen to us on. Please give a thought to click and subscribe, and maybe even a comment, because we like hearing from you.